The final ultimatum. The great assembly hall of the Galactic Tribunal stretched beyond human comprehension. Crystalline walls rose like frozen lightning, reaching toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves. Within this vast space, representatives from 47 different species had gathered for one purpose: to decide the fate of humanity. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood alone at the center of it all. Her simple black diplomatic suit looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate biosuits, energy fields, and mechanical forms that surrounded her. But her spine was straight, her chin raised, and her eyes held a fire that had burned in human hearts since the first cave dweller decided to fight a saber-toothed tiger instead of running away. High above her, on platforms that defied gravity itself, the judges watched. Kethvar of the reptilian hegemony coiled his massive form around his perch, scales glinting like armor in the ethereal light. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds. "Human," he hissed, the translator making his words sound cold and final. "You stand accused of territorial aggression. Your species has expanded beyond the boundaries set by this tribunal. Your colonies have grown too numerous, your influence too strong." Chen's jaw tightened, but she said nothing yet. She had learned patience in the diplomatic corps, learned to let her enemies speak first and reveal their true intentions. Zixara of the Crystalline Confederation chimed in, her voice like wind through crystal caves. "The human tendency toward violence has been documented extensively. Your species wages war upon itself, shows little regard for established order. You are unstable, unpredictable." A ripple of agreement passed through the assembly. Species after species nodded, chirped, or flashed their approval. They had made up their minds before this trial began. "Furthermore," continued Velthar of the Avian Collective, his feathers rustling with what might have been discussed, "humans breed too quickly, adapt too readily. You do not know your place in the natural order." Chen finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "And what place is that, honored judges?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kethvar's eyes narrowed to slits. "Servitude, labor. Your species excels at surviving harsh conditions, at performing tasks others find distasteful. This is your natural role." "I see." Chen's voice remained level, but something shifted in her posture. Those who knew humans well might have recognized the warning signs, the subtle tightening around her eyes, the way her hands moved just slightly behind her back. "And if we refuse this natural role?" "Then you will be contained," Zixara announced, her crystalline form pulsing with authority. "Your expansion will cease. Your outer colonies will be evacuated within 72 standard hours. Your species will be confined to your home system and 3 designated worlds suitable for your services." The chamber filled with approving sounds. Finally, the human problem would be solved. They would be put in their proper place, controlled, managed like any other resource. Chen stood in silence for a long moment, and in that silence, something ancient stirred, not just in her, but in every human watching the broadcast across Earth and its colonies. It was the same thing that had driven their ancestors to cross frozen land bridges, to sail across endless oceans, to reach for the stars themselves when everyone said it was impossible. "Honored judges," Chen said finally, and her voice carried a note that made several species shift uncomfortably. "I have served as Earth's ambassador for 15 years. In that time I have negotiated treaties, prevented conflicts, and always sought peaceful solutions." She paused, and when she continued, her words carried the weight of history itself. "But today, you have made a mistake. You have confused our desire for peace with weakness. You have mistaken our cooperation for submission." Her eyes swept across the assembly, meeting the gaze of every judge. "You think you know humanity. You think you understand what we are." Kethvar laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "We understand perfectly, little human. You are clever animals, nothing more." Chen smiled then, and it was not a pleasant expression. No, you understand nothing at all. You see our wars and call us violent, but you miss the fact that we have learned to channel that violence precisely where it needs to go. You see our rapid reproduction and call it primitive, but you ignore that it means we value every single life enough to create more. Her voice began to rise, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. You see our adaptability and call it chaotic, but you fail to recognize that it means we can survive anywhere, become anything, overcome any obstacle you place before us. The assembly was growing restless now. This was not how condemned species usually behaved. You think you can contain us, control us, put us in our place? Chen's laugh was harsh, carrying echoes of every human who had ever stared into the darkness and refused to blink. You have no idea what you're dealing with. She stepped forward, and despite being surrounded by beings who could crush her without effort, they seemed to shrink back. For centuries, we have been the reasonable ones, the diplomatic ones. We have compromised, negotiated, sought common ground. We have shown you the face we thought you could understand. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. But that was never our true face. Zixara's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. You dare threaten this assembly? Threaten? Chen shook her head slowly. No, honored judge. This is not a threat. This is a warning. The chamber fell dead silent. Push us once more. Force us from our colonies. Try to cage humanity. Her eyes blazed with the fire of a species that had clawed its way up from caves to stars. And you will see our true face, and when you do, you will remember this moment. You will remember that we offered you peace, and you chose war. She turned to leave, then paused. 72 hours, you said. That's exactly how long it will take you to realize your mistake. As Chen walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence, not one being in that vast assembly dared to speak. Something in her words, in her manner, had touched a primal fear that transcended species. Back on Earth, in a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Marcus Torres watched the broadcast with grim satisfaction. Around him, screens showed the positions of ships that officially didn't exist, weapons that had never been tested, and soldiers who had trained for scenarios no one hoped would ever come to pass. Ma'am delivered the message, he said to his assembled staff. Now we see if they're smart enough to listen. Colonel Sarah Kim, his second-in-command, looked up from a tactical display. And if they're not? Torres's smile was cold as space itself. Then we show them what happens when you mistake human restraint for human limits. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiology specialist who had spent decades studying alien psychology, spoke quietly from her station. They won't back down. Their entire power structure depends on maintaining the hierarchy. If they show weakness to humanity, every other species will start to question the order. Then they've made their choice, Torres replied. Signal all Ghost Fleet commanders. Operation Pandora is now active. Across the galaxy, in star systems that galactic maps showed as empty space, ancient human instincts stirred. Ships powered up their engines. Weapons that violated several galactic treaties charged their capacitors, and soldiers who had volunteered for missions they might not survive checked their equipment one final time. Humanity had tried to be reasonable. They had tried to find their place in the galactic community, to prove they could be trusted, controlled, managed. But some species, it seemed, could only learn the hard way. The tribunal had given humanity 72 hours. What they didn't understand was that humans had been preparing for this moment since the day they first looked up at the stars and decided they belonged there. The countdown had begun. In diplomatic circles across the galaxy, emergency sessions convened. Some species, those who had dealt with humans more directly, urged caution. They had seen what happened when humans felt cornered, had witnessed the quiet determination that could turn shopkeepers into soldiers and farmers into fleet commanders. But the major powers dismissed these concerns. Humans were a young species, barely out of their home system. What could they possibly do against the combined might of 47 galactic civilizations? They were about to find out. As the first day passed, human colonies began their evacuations, but something was wrong. The ships that arrived to collect refugees were larger than expected, their cargo holds filled with more than just personal belongings. Families said goodbye to their homes with dry eyes and steady hands, loading children and elderly onto transports with the efficiency of a species that had been planning for exactly this moment. The tribunal monitored the evacuations with satisfaction. The humans were complying, accepting their fate. But a few observers, those who had studied human history, noted the similarities to other great human movements: the careful preservation of important documents, the way communities stayed together, the quiet conversations about temporary setbacks and regrouping. It reminded them of something they had read about in human archives, something called a strategic withdrawal. By the end of the second day, long-range sensors began detecting anomalies. Ships where there shouldn't be ships, energy signatures that didn't match any known human technology, and most disturbing of all, complete communication silence from sectors that should have been bustling with evacuation traffic. On Earth, Ambassador Chen stood in the same bunker where Admiral Torres coordinated humanity's response. She had shed her diplomatic attire for simple military fatigues, her ambassador's pin replaced by an insignia that marked her as what she had been before entering the diplomatic corps: Major Sarah Chen, Human Marine Corps, veteran of the Titan incident. "Any response to our warning?" she asked. Torres shook his head. "Nothing official, but our intelligence assets report massive fleet movements. They're positioning for a show of force, planning to ensure compliance with their ultimatum." "Then they've made their choice," Chen said quietly. "Signal all human forces. The gloves come off." Across human space, the evacuation ships that had seemed so compliant suddenly changed course. Instead of heading toward Earth and the designated containment worlds, they vanished into the dark spaces between stars, following routes that had been planned in secret for years. What the tribunal didn't know was that humanity had learned from every species they had encountered. From the reptilian hegemony, they had learned patience and long-term planning. From the crystalline confederation, they had learned to think in terms of networks and connections. From the avian collective, they had learned the value of appearing weak while preparing strength. But most importantly, they had remained human. And humans, when pushed too far, didn't just fight back. They fought to win. As the 72nd hour approached, tribunal forces moved into position around human colonies, ready to enforce the evacuation order and demonstrate galactic authority. Fleet commanders prepared for a simple operation: ensure compliance, maybe fire a few warning shots, show the humans their place in the order of things. They expected to find scattered refugees, hastily abandoned settlements, and the dejected remnants of human expansion. Instead, they found something that would haunt their species' nightmares for generations to come. They found humanity's true face. The galaxy learns why humans don't bluff. The first sign that something was wrong came from the hegemony's third battle fleet as they approached the mining colony of New Kandahar. Admiral Sekhmoth expected to find abandoned settlements and perhaps a few stragglers who needed encouragement to leave. Instead, his sensors detected something impossible. "Admiral," his communications officer hissed, confusion clear in his voice, "I'm reading massive energy signatures from the planet's surface, and sir, there are ships in orbit." Sekhmoth's scale is rippled with irritation. "Impossible! Human evacuation was confirmed complete 12 hours ago." "Sir, I'm counting at least 30 vessels. Configuration unknown, but they're big, sir." On the bridge screens, the impossible became visible. Ships hung in space around New Kandahar, but they weren't like any human vessels in the galactic databases. These were larger, more angular, their hulls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. They sat in perfect formation, silent as death itself. "This is Admiral Sekhmoth of the Reptilian Hegemony 3rd Battle Fleet," he broadcast on all frequencies. You are in violation of Tribunal Order 7743. Identify yourselves and prepare for immediate departure. The response came not in words, but in action. Every human ship in the formation suddenly lit up like stars. Weapons systems that had been hidden suddenly revealed, targeting systems locking onto every hegemony vessel simultaneously. A voice crackled across the communication channels, calm and professional, with the slight accent that marked the speaker as coming from one of Earth's military academies. Admiral Sekmoth, this is Captain Rosa Martinez of the Terran Ghost Fleet. You are now in violation of human sovereign space. You have 30 seconds to withdraw, or we will demonstrate why humanity doesn't make threats we can't keep. Sekmoth's blood ran cold. Ghost Fleet. There was no such thing in any intelligence report. Humans barely had a dozen functioning warships, ancient vessels designed for system patrol, not fleet combat. Human, you are outnumbered 3-1. Surrender immediately. Martinez's laugh was like ice breaking. Admiral, you're thinking in the old terms. You see 30 ships and think you know what you're facing, but you don't understand the first thing about human warfare. Enlighten me, Sekmoth snarled. We don't fight to win battles, Admiral. We fight to end wars. The first human ship to open fire was the UTS Determination, a vessel that, according to all galactic records, had been scrapped 5 years earlier. Its main gun, a weapon that violated at least 7 different treaty restrictions, sent a beam of concentrated energy directly through the flagship's shields as if they didn't exist. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was what happened next. Instead of following up with a killing blow, the humans targeted specific systems, engines crippled but not destroyed, weapons disabled but crews left alive, communications knocked out but life support intact. Within minutes, the entire hegemony fleet was dead in space, completely helpless, but with every single crew member still breathing. This, Captain Martinez's voice continued over the comm, is what humans call a demonstration. Your ships are disabled, not destroyed. Your crews are alive, not dead. Take this message back to your tribunal. Humanity does not surrender. We do not kneel, and we do not fight by your rules. Similar scenes played out across a dozen systems simultaneously. Crystalline Confederation forces found themselves facing human vessels that seemed to phase in and out of reality, using technology that bent space itself. Avian collective fleets discovered that their perfect formation flying meant nothing when humans could predict their every move and counter it before they even knew they were being countered. The reports flooding back to the tribunal made no sense. Humans were supposed to be primitive, limited to basic spaceflight and convention. All weapons. Instead, they were demonstrating technology that surpassed anything in the galactic database. What the tribunal didn't understand was that humanity had been preparing for this day since their first contact with galactic civilization. Every treaty they signed, every trade agreement they negotiated, every diplomatic mission they undertook had been an intelligence-gathering operation. Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent 15 years studying alien psychology, not out of academic curiosity, but to understand how different species thought, how they made decisions, how they could be outmaneuvered. Human engineers had analyzed every piece of alien technology they could access, not to copy it, but to understand its weaknesses. Most importantly, humanity had done something no other species had ever attempted. They had prepared for war against the entire galaxy. The Ghost Fleet was just the beginning. As tribunal forces tried to regroup and coordinate their response, they discovered that human preparations ran far deeper than anyone had imagined. Supply lines that should have been secure found themselves under attack by ships that appeared from nowhere, struck with surgical precision, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Communication networks experienced mysterious failures that isolated tribunal forces from their command structures. Entire fleets found themselves flying blind through space, their navigation systems compromised by viruses that had been planted years earlier. On the homeworlds of the major powers, civilian populations began receiving broadcasts that bypassed all security systems. The voice was always the same, Ambassador Chen, speaking in perfect native languages that humans supposedly didn't know. "Citizens of the galaxy," she would say, her image appearing on screens across dozens of worlds simultaneously. "Your leaders have chosen war with humanity. They have done so without consulting you, without considering the cost, without understanding what they face." The broadcasts would then show footage from the battles, tribunal fleets disabled but not destroyed, crews rescued by human vessels even as their ships were being neutralized. "This is what your leaders call human savagery. We could have destroyed every ship, killed every crew member. Instead, we disabled them and made sure their people got home alive. Ask yourselves, who are the real savages here?" The psychological impact was devastating. Species that had been told humans were unreasonable, violent primitives were seeing evidence of restraint and tactical brilliance that their own militaries couldn't match. But the humans weren't done. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a young Marine who had volunteered for Operation Prometheus, stood on the bridge of the UTS Retribution as it approached the Tribunal's primary command station. Around him, his squad checked their equipment one final time. "Remember," Morrison told his people, "we're not here to conquer, we're here to make a point." The command station was a massive structure, home to the administrative apparatus that controlled galactic civilization. It was protected by the combined fleets of 6 major powers and surrounded by defensive platforms that could level continents. The humans took it in 4 hours. They didn't do it through overwhelming force or technological superiority. They did it by being completely, utterly, impossibly human. While tribunal forces waited for a frontal assault, human infiltration teams had been moving through the station's infrastructure for days, placed there by maintenance workers, trade delegations, and diplomatic missions that had been visiting for years. When the attack came, it came from inside, with security systems turning against their operators and automated defenses targeting tribunal ships instead of human ones. But even then, the humans held back. Instead of seizing control of the station, they simply demonstrated that they could. Instead of capturing the tribunal leadership, they delivered a message. Morrison stood in the primary command center, surrounded by tribunal officials who had been the undisputed rulers of known space for millennia. His weapon was holstered, his posture relaxed, but his eyes held the confidence of someone who knew exactly how outclassed his enemies were. "Honored judges," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Ambassador Chen sends her regards." He activated a holographic projector, and suddenly, the chamber filled with images. Human colonies that were supposed to be evacuated, still thriving. Human fleets that weren't supposed to exist, patrolling space with casual efficiency. Human technology that violated every assumption about their capabilities. "You wanted to put humanity in its place," Morrison continued. "Well, this is our place, everywhere. In your supply lines, your communication networks, your command structures. We've been here all along, watching, learning, preparing." Kethavar, his scales pale with shock, managed to speak. "Impossible. Our intelligence services would have detected such infiltration." Morrison's smile was almost pitying. "Your intelligence services? Sir, with respect, half your intelligence services are human assets. We've been feeding you the information you wanted to hear while learning everything we needed to know." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. Not only had they underestimated human military capability, they had been completely compromised from the beginning. "What do you want?" Zed. Zara's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been fear. "What we've always wanted," Morrison replied. "To be left alone to go our own way, to explore, to grow, to build. You tried to force us into a box, to make us serve your vision of galactic order." He gestured to the images surrounding them. "This is what happens when you try to cage humanity. We don't just break out, we redesign the entire prison." As Morrison spoke, reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy. Human forces weren't just winning individual battles, they were rewriting the rules of engagement entirely. They used their enemies' strengths against them, turned every advantage into a liability, and demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that left military academics scrambling to understand their methods. The Nexus 7 Collective, machine intelligences that prided themselves on perfect logic, found their decision trees corrupted by human concepts that defied rational analysis. The Hive Queens discovered that their perfect unity meant nothing against opponents who could think as individuals while coordinating as a group. Ancient observer species that had watched the rise and fall of civilizations for millennia admitted they had never seen anything like human adaptability. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the human response was its restraint. Every tribunal ship that was disabled was then rescued. Every crew that surrendered was treated according to galactic conventions. Every civilian population was protected, even when their governments continued to fight. Humans fought with a precision and control that scared their enemies more than any berserker rage could have. It suggested a level of discipline and long-term thinking that made them utterly unpredictable. Within a week, the balance of galactic power had shifted permanently. Species that had been minor players suddenly found themselves courted by both sides. Trade routes that had been untrolled by the major powers for centuries were now under human protection. And everywhere, the question was being asked, if humans could do this much damage while still showing restraint, what would happen if they truly went to war? The answer came from an unexpected source. Quindos, eldest of the observer species, had remained silent throughout the crisis. But as the tribunal scrambled to salvage their authority, the ancient being finally spoke. "We have watched civilizations rise and fall for 10 million years, Quindos said, his voice carrying the weight of eons. We have seen species that conquered through strength, others through intellect, still others through unity or technology." The chamber fell silent, every being hanging on the ancient words. "But in all that time we have never seen a species that conquered through restraint. Humans could have destroyed you all. Instead, they showed you mercy you did not deserve, demonstrated wisdom you do not possess, and offered you a future you had already rejected." The observer turned its attention to the human marine who still stood calmly in their midst. "Tell your leaders that the observers recognize humanity's claim to independence. More than that, we acknowledge what you have proven here today, that the strong do not rule by right, but by the consent of those they would govern." As Morrison prepared to leave, carrying humanity's terms for a new galactic order, he paused at the chamber's entrance. "You know," he said, his voice almost conversational, "Ambassador Chen asked me to deliver one final message." He turned to face the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. "She said to remind you that this was humanity holding back. This was us being diplomatic." His smile was sharp as a blade. "Push us once more, and you'll see what we're like when we stop being reasonable." The silence that followed his departure lasted for hours. When it finally broke, it was with the sound of species after species requesting formal diplomatic relations with Earth. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson about underestimating humanity. More importantly, they had learned that humans didn't just survive being pushed to their limits. They thrived there. And somewhere in the depths of space, Admiral Torres received a message from Ambassador Chen. Mission accomplished. Time to build a better galaxy. The age of human diplomacy had truly begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.